Hello, this is Mr. Galley from GCSE English Revision Pod with a quick message for you. If you want even more English Revision Pod in your ears, you can now subscribe to our premium service, GCSE English Revision Pod Plus, where for the price of just over £2 a month, on top of all the amazing free episodes which will continue to be free and there for you to use, you can also get a selection of amazing bonus episodes on things like Macbeth, A Christmas Carol, Romeo and Juliet, and all your favourite topics covered in the depth and detail that you are used to. If you are interested in getting even more GCSE English Revision Pod, all you've got to do is click the link at the top of this episode description where you can subscribe to GCSE English Revision Pod Plus. Hello and welcome to GCSE English Revision Pod. We are here today to bring you a slightly different format in the very short run-up now that exists before your GCSEs. This is our last-minute literature revision pod, where rather than our normal format of taking you through a question and working in detail with a text, we are instead going to go through what we believe creates quality essays, the kind of things you can do over these last few days. And we're going to focus particularly on two kind of boundaries of essays, aren't we, Mr. Forster?
Yeah, we're gonna look at kind of what's the difference between a grade 4 and a grade 6 essay. And then we're also going to look at what's the difference then between grade 6 and what's between the top grades, the grade 8s and grade 9s at the very top. Obviously, grades don't exist on individual papers. We're aware of that. Grade boundaries change every year. But with that in mind, we're talking about the kind of skills that normally would lead you to go on to get those sorts of grades.
Exactly. We're talking about the average quality you produce across your paper, essentially. Now, it will, all of your papers, I should say. Now, it will come as no surprise to regular listeners that I will be handling the 4 to 6 boundary, and Mr. Forster's going to deal with the 6 to 9 specifics.
We'll both talk about both, but we can
about both. Exactly. And depending on, of course, on what you're working for. In all seriousness, it's getting whatever you get. If you're performing your target grade and above, it's an absolute result. Doesn't matter what that target is. If you are able to push yourself beyond that, that is a fantastic thing. And you should be very, very proud when and if you manage that. So let's start off by talking about what transforms that passing grade essay, a grade 4, into that grade 6, which is that much sort of stronger, higher pass. Now, a couple of things to really focus on here. What will make a great difference is moving from what we always talk about in the podcast, saying something exists in the text is never going to get you that higher grade. If the question asks you about, for example, poverty in A Christmas Carol, or bravery in Macbeth, or fate in Romeo and Juliet, or duality in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or whatever it is, if your essay only says, yes, this thing is there in the text, this thing exists in the text, you are going to struggle to get up beyond that grade 4. Once
it's classic kind of topic sense, isn't it, where people go like, fate is presented in many different ways, and Shakespeare uses many techniques to show it. It's like it's not saying anything. It's acknowledging its existence. It's never going to get you into those high grades.
And it's unnecessary, because the very fact that they've asked you that question is evidence enough that that thing exists in the text. The exam board would never have asked you that question in the first place if that thing didn't exist in the text. So that's when you start thinking about those 3 big ideas. That's when you think about the thing we always come back to, these 3 big ideas, and the and what that does, of course, is it moves you from just saying something is there to actually having a point about that thing, right? Saying that something is presented in a certain way for a certain reason. So if it was bravery in Macbeth, for example, it's the difference between saying, oh yeah, Macbeth is brave in the play, to saying Shakespeare presents Macbeth as brave at the start of the play so that we can see how much he is corrupted and how far he has to fall down from his initial positive presentation, right? So in order to prepare for that, you need to go through the possible questions that could come up, and you need to think to yourself, right, with all these themes and all these characters that could come up, what is my actual argument about them? What am I saying about that character or that theme? Not just that they're there, but what am I actually saying about them? Could
So
you
if you
comment?
already listened to all of our podcasts, one thing you could do is download all the handouts and just look at the thesis statements and the topic sentences, the first sentence of each paragraph, because actually this kind of first idea of having a clear, explained response to the task in whole text, which you'll need for that grade 6, just is the argument clear? Just read the first sentence of each section, our topic sentences, and you'll see something that will straight away set out an argument, and then try to kind of imitate that in your own planning.
And this leads me on to my next point, which is once you've got your 3 big ideas and you've made sure that each of those big ideas is actually saying something about the question, it becomes pretty easy to write a thesis statement. Basically, your thesis statement is just a summary of those ideas. Think of it as like a little roadmap for your essay. But the key word, if you look at the mark scheme, and obviously, as Mr. Forster was quite right to say, you're not given a grade on an individual essay. But the key word across the mark scheme, if you're going to get that 6, is the word clear, right? It's when the overall quality of your essay can be considered clear in its argument. And a big part of that clarity, both for you and the examiner, comes from having that clear thesis statement, right? Think of it as I always tell my students to think of it as the anchor, right? Think about the anchor holding a ship in place, right? Making sure that doesn't move about on the sea. Your introduction, your thesis statement is doing just that. It is holding your essay there. And if you, not just for the person marking it, if you get a bit lost in the middle of it, which can happen, you've got something to look back at and remind yourself, oh yeah, that's where I was going. That's what the point I was making. And you can steer yourself back onto it. The second thing I would say, my second big piece of advice when it comes to targeting that grade 6 is students who tend to get these grades will talk about what the writer does as bigger than single quotations. Do you understand what I mean by that, Mr. Forster?
Yeah, because one thing that often people are taught when they're beginning to write literature essays, often lower down the school, is these kind of acronyms around PEE paragraphs or something along those lines. And what that can encourage, not in all pupils, but in some pupils, it can encourage kind of using single quotations as if they are somehow kind of monoliths that represent everything you could possibly say about the topic. So it suddenly becomes the evidence for your argument. And that is never going to lead to these kind of higher grade responses, is it?
Well, this is it. This is absolutely it. And that kind of links really neatly into revision, I think, because the best things you can possibly revise are the things that the writer does across the entire text. So we're looking for extended metaphors. Things like in A Christmas Carol, light and heat are used to represent love throughout the entire text. And similarly, cold is used to represent isolation and lack of love. In Macbeth, blood on the hands is a motif, is an extended metaphor for guilt that Shakespeare uses again and again.
It's a wonderful metaphor, a wonderful motif to track in Macbeth as well. Every reference to clothing, ill-fitting clothing, and the idea of identity being tied into kind of what we look like. So we talk about a lot of these motifs in all of our podcasts. So again, as you do your last minute revision and you're listening to a couple of our other podcasts, if we talk about a motif, pause the podcast, make a note of it, because that becomes a tool you can use in lots of different essays.
Absolutely. Elevate yourself beyond single level quotations. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use a single quotation as part of your analysis. But what you should be thinking is, I know there's this brilliant quotation in Macbeth about how he thinks that all the oceans in the world couldn't wash his hands clean, and instead his hands would turn those oceans red. But I'm not going to talk about that in isolation. I'm going to talk about that in the context of blood being a metaphor for guilt throughout that entire text, right? If I'm talking about Jekyll and Hyde and I'm talking about duality, I'm going to consider the fact that throughout the entire thing, Hyde is a metaphor for the dark, horrible side of ourselves that lurks within us, right? It's that idea of, I'm going to use this brilliant bit of language that the writer has produced, but as well as analysing it on that micro level, I'm going to think about it and how it sits in the whole thing. And for me, I think, Mr. Forster, unless there's anything else you chuck in, I think those are the two biggest things, really, that get you up towards that grade 6. It is having a proper argument that can be considered clear and be considered saying something, and it is considering your evidence in the context of the work as a whole rather than as individual snippets of it.
It's something that we'll look at in a second. We look at the grade 6 to grade 8 and 9. It's kind of being able to move, because the best literature essays, and this is even more true when we get to the very top end, are able to move between the macro and the micro, the kind of the big zoomed out look at this motif across the whole play, and then this micro look at this single scene, this single moment. So I mean, if we look at then what kind of grade 9 looks like, so typically to get a top grade in English literature, you're looking at the top band of the mark scheme. And the key
Yes.
words in the top band of the mark scheme are critical, exploratory, conceptualized response to the task and the whole text. So what we're kind of looking there, if we start by thinking about the argument, as we did with the kind of the grade 4 to 6, we're looking at an argument that's exploratory. It links me back to the point I always say in lessons when I'm teaching how to write essays. Essay comes, do you know the etymology of essay?
I do. It comes from, only because you've told me several times, but it comes from the it comes from the French word, I believe, Mr. Forster, meaning to test an idea.
It's to put on trial.
Today, actually, and I pretended like it was something I knew rather than something that I'd stolen off.
One of Mr. Forster's borrowing stories, but but if you, it's a great way of thinking about it. If you're looking for those top grades, that if you realise that an essay is putting an idea on trial, you're trying out ideas. And this is one of the whole, don't get me onto ChatGPT and GPT and kind of AI cheating it, but this is what, ultimately, we're not writing essays to get a good grade. We're writing essays to learn how to think. That's ultimately what we're doing. And what a top grade essay does is it enables you to try out different ideas, to evaluate ideas in an argument. So if you get a question on bravery in Macbeth, you might start by arguing that actually at the start of the play, Macbeth is very brave. This is what the bloody soldier comes in to tell Duncan. He's incredibly brave, and he's still and he loses that bravery actually in the moments up to the regicide when he kind of in the face of what he knows is an unnatural act. And so you might then have a paragraph on kind of the ways in which he's cowardly, and then you might have some kind of final section kind of synthesizing those ideas and being in what way is bravery a positive thing for him? If his bravery pushes him towards these kind of evil deeds, is bravery a good thing? What kind of bravery is the play valorizing, celebrating? So it's trying to explore, to essay, to find an argument where you're able to argue, find ambiguity. So I think what I'd say to summarize that point is the key thing that often, I've marked GCSE essays for many, many years for different exam boards. And the key thing that's always really apparent about top grade essays is they come in with an argument, but they're always willing to explore why other people might think differently from that. And find ambiguity, find things that are elusive and be really engaged in them. So that's kind of the first big one I'd think about. And the second I'm thinking about...
Can I just jump in for a moment there? And this is something I sometimes say to students who I think are really targeting that top grade. I don't know if it fits with the way you think about it, but I sometimes say, look for the question within the question, because there's often another layer to the question. And it was interesting, actually. I had a student come to me today, a very, very strong student, and they'd done this practice essay for me about Lady Macbeth. And the question that she'd used was, I think, how does Shakespeare present Lady Macbeth as a strong character? And she'd written this great stuff, but only about when Lady Macbeth was strong. And I was like, well, the glaring omission here, of course, is that there's a part at the end of the play when she's anything but strong, And what that student then said was, oh, well, I didn't think I could write about that because the question said, how is she presented as a strong character? And I thought, I can 100% see why you thought that. But really, even if the question says, how is she a strong character? Implicit within that question is she really a strong character? To what extent? Exactly. And sometimes
I think to what extent is a great phrase to kind of almost insert into the question in those scenarios. Yeah. If you imagine the question as to what extent, suddenly that's encouraging you to essay, to unpick, to be exploratory in what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which brings me to our kind of second point here. When thinking about particularly our language analysis, because again, I think these are the main focuses today, kind of argument and analysis that really kind of differentiate often between those grades. What top students do is that ability to move between the macro and the micro. Just as we said for grade 4 to 6, it's this really confident ability. The first thing I would do if I was gunning for a top grade in the GCSEs over the kind of the last few days before the exam, is I would make sure that I tracked every single motif in my text, that I had a number of examples linked together. I would make sure that I'd also kind of sat down to think about a wider variety of aspects of authorial craft, because the comfort blanket that everyone goes back to is the connotations of this word. Or they start talking about word class and say this noun suggests this verb suggests this. You see all of this in so many essays is what you see. Or people latch onto something micro and talk about asyndetic listing or something. Whereas what they often fail to do is think about, how does your analysis link together? So looking for things that complement with an E, which means kind of like links together rather than with an I that means to say nice things. So it's like, if you're looking at a poem, how does the sounds complement the metaphor? If there's a violent metaphor, how does the plosive alliteration here adds to that sense of violence? If you're looking at a Shakespeare play, how does the rhyming couplet that ends the scene add to the assertive language finishing off that moment? If you're looking at a novel, how does the narrative perspective link in with the motif of fire that you might be looking at? How does the shift in focalization to explore a different character's perspective link to the metaphor that you see on the page? Because that is a high level skill, and this is something we try and model on all of our podcasts. So again, listen back to any episode, because really we've kind of tricked you a bit with our podcasts. You listen to them thinking you're getting how to do a bravery essay in Macbeth, but what we're actually trying to teach you is the skills to write any essay. And that's actually what I hope you kind of realize with this kind of last minute pod, that you don't need to listen to every single episode over, imagine if you're listening to this 2 hours before the exam, you don't need to listen to it on double speed and try and cram it into your head. What you need to think about really carefully is what approach do we take to the question? What sorts of things do we do? What sorts of analysis do we link together? Because that's what we're modeling really for the grade 8 and grade 9. It's that ability to have that kind of that argument that explores different approaches to the question, and that analysis that links together different aspects of authorial craft and moves between kind of quite macro things like narrative perspective, narrative structure, into kind of the quite micro kind of word level sounds, those kind of choices. So that's probably my 2 top tips for those top grades.
I think another, it reminds me of something that, again, something that I say to students who I think can maybe get up there. There is no hard and fast rule for how much to talk about something, and what those grade 9 students know almost intuitively, really, I think, is how much time to spend on what they're currently talking about. So sometimes you might be bringing up quite a small moment in the play just to establish that this is when something changes. And actually, you might need very little in the way of analysis of that moment, because what you're really flagging up, what you're doing there is you're sort of signposting, well, this is, the sort of the transitional moment for this character. I don't need to dig it. I don't need to pull it to pieces. I just need to establish it's there, so I can then go on to say what I want to say about the next part, and that is, I think, something that you always see in those top essays is they know when that bit of the text has done enough for them, and they're like, right, on I go now. That was all I needed from that.
Because just because you want an evaluative essay doesn't mean you evaluate every single point. Some points are just simple points that you state and move on. It's finding, and that's what when I come back to that first point, perhaps as the last point really about this, it's kind of finding ambiguity and complexity. What I've been saying, speaking kind of my kind of current kind of crusade against the maths department in our school, is that maths is all about kind of taking the complexities of the world and making it simple, reducing it to a number, to a sum, to an equation. What English is about, what top grade English is about, is finding something that might seem simple and unraveling the complexities within it. That, for me, is the key to a grade 9 essay, starting with something that seems simple and then being, but actually, is it this simple? What's the counter argument? How can we unravel this, make it explore the nuances and the complexities of this? And if you're doing that, you're probably going to get a top grade.
I like to think of you falling out with the maths department at your new school.
I like to needle them a bit, give them a prod, keep them on their toes.
It's a great idea, and it's if we ever do get round to selling merchandise, I think, is it, I can't even remember what you said there, but certainly one moment of that. I like the bit before as well, when your keen business brain kicked in and told our listeners they don't really need to listen to that many episodes. That's the kind of that's the kind of thinking that means we're going to be successful here. Yeah. Right, we hope that was helpful to you. We hope you are able to do really well. We will be thinking of you all. I'm sorry that we haven't got back to all of your emails. It is
we got back to most of them. You not? I've been replying.
You're great at replying. I know I've been terrible. But yeah, thank you so much.
We do read them. So we do read them all. Even if we don't reply, we read all of them. And like, if you want to tell us how your exam went, we love hearing how your exams went. We love hearing your messages.
I love the results day ones. Genuinely, it's amazing to hear from you guys when your results come in. So please do that. And yeah, best of luck. We will be thinking of you.